Hello, this is Sabina at Cross Keys Crafts. At first, apologies, I've still got a croaky voice. I've got this bug that's going round. I'm feeling fine otherwise at the moment, but I can't shift the croaky voice. So today I would like to show you very simple ways of how to create quick backgrounds. I'm using this 300 GSM mixed media paper for all techniques, and I'm going to dive straight in. So for my first technique, I have got my two inks ready. One is the Lavinia Elements Pine, and I've also got a Distress Oxide, the Mowed Lawn. It doesn't matter which one you use, you want some sort of water reactive ink, they work best. And I've got my brayer, and all I'm trying to do now is just to add some ink onto my jelly plate. So I'm just rolling this around. There are different ways of applying these, but I would just like to mix these a little bit. You can go directly to the jelly plate, but you don't. If you just do that, it will leave some harsh edges. So I'm just going to use my brayer again, trying to blend that a bit in. And you can't see very much, you can't see what happens really. But if I just mist this now, you can see it gets a bit more intense, and I don't mind a bit of splatter. I've got a stencil here, I'm going to link to it below because I forgot the name of it. So I'm just going to put this down. I think I will put it like this, so I've got the bigger, I think they're flames to me, but they also look a bit like peacock feathers. And then I'm just going to put this on top, make sure I don't shift it, and then I just go over it with my brayer just for pressure. And then just use my fingers as well to press it through. Again, keep one hand on it so you don't shift it. So when you take this off, you've got this background. It's much a bit at the bottom. I'm not too bothered by this. I love this sort of organic look. Setting this aside to dry. And now I'm taking this off. And wherever you had the stencil, there is some remainder. You can also use the stencil to stamp with this, but I'm not doing that in this case. I'm going to use another paper. So another piece of cardstock. Again, setting it down and just picking up the remainder. This is a bit easier to move about because it doesn't have the stencil. You don't have to get in between the bits there. And when you peel that off, you basically got the negative, which looks like the stencil, and there you go, you've got another background. You can stamp over this or do something over this, which I might actually do before I use it because it's a very subtle background. But that's the first way of creating backgrounds with your jelly plate and some stencils. For the second technique I want to show you, I have got my spray box ready. My spray box is just a cardboard box, a bit the size of a shoe box, and I've opened one side and flattened this out so I can actually spray in here without any residue of the sprays or glues ending up on my desk. Because I want to use this Lavinia acrylic spray in chartreuse, and I find it's not very precise, and you just need to let it happen and do what it wants to do. So if I want to be sure not to have anything else on any ink on my desk, I better use my spray box. So all you need to do is just hold it further away and just very lightly spray it. Make sure you clean it up after you used it, because when it clogs up, it makes blotches of colour, and if you don't want that and you want it a bit like this, then all that is what you need to do. Let me just lift it out so you can actually see the colour. So I quite like this one. I love the green. I can always show you in a second what it looks like if you spray it through a stencil. So for that, I'll just lay my stencil down and put it facing it this way up now because it's still got the green from earlier on there. And I choose the same spot. As I said, I just use this to lightly spray through it. And taking the stencil off without moving it on there. And there you go. There you've got the stenciled image. And I will show you in comparison later when they've dried what it looks like compared to the stencil on the Gelli plate. For the third technique, I have changed the liner in my spray box. I always put some scrap paper in here, actually old football posters from the pub that advertise the football matches. And I have got ready my Brushos. I have got an emerald green and a leaf green, and I really like the Brushos. Again, they're not something that are really precise. So if you're a crafter and you don't like things to just randomly happen, maybe these aren't for you. But I just love what happens with these. So all you need to do is just, I got this idea, oh, I can't remember who from, whether it was from Elaine Godwin or Joe Rice. I just put a little hole in the top there and keep this little pin in there. And this allows me to very precisely move these, put these over the surface. I'll do the same with this one here. And they look a bit, the first one looks a bit orangey. The second one is a sort of dull green. But once you apply water, and this is why I'm doing it in spray box as well, because that will spray towards the back. Sorry if it's a bit dark there, I'll show you the result in a second. So you use your spray water bottle and just mist over this. And then they're a bit like other companies call them explosion powders because the colours just explode. Sorry, this is getting a bit blodgy. So you want, ideally you want a bit of a mist. And I'll just spray this all over until I'm happy with it. You can get really, really wet and leave it to run, but I don't want this. I like it like this, where it still stays in certain places and you just let it do what it wants to do. Let me just lift it up with the paper underneath so you can see this. And I think this is fantastic. Yeah, if you end up with a bit too much water, again, you can blot it with some tissue paper. You can work this around a little bit, but I think the fun of using the Brushos is that you just let it happen and you just see what the colour itself creates rather than trying to manipulate it too much. So I'm leaving this to dry as well, and then I'll show you how I turn all these backgrounds into cards. So just to show you this, I played off screen a bit. I had the second print from the Gelli plate where I basically took on the residue and had this really, really faint imprint of the stencil. What you see here was an attempt for me to paint over it with the acrylic spray. I put that on an acrylic block and tried to paint over it, thinking it would be very transparent, but it's actually not. It just made blotches, so that didn't work, so I stopped that straight away. But I decided to use this to create some die cuts. So all I did was I used my Element Sundance and just ink blended over it on the back. There's actually some residue as well from the Gelli plate that was on there before. But this is still good enough for me, as I said, to create some die cuts, use some pieces of this on the other background with the stencil. So I'm going to show you how I will reuse this so it doesn't have to be scrapped. Having said that, however, if you ever find one of your projects does not turn out as you want to be, especially if you create loads of backgrounds, which is very easy to do if you ever got Gelli plate, never hesitate to put things in the bin or just use the back again as scrap, because otherwise you end up with a big stash of backgrounds that you never use, and that just creates clutter in your craft room, and you don't want that. So, but as I said, I will be using bits of this later on when I create my cards. Okay, it's a few hours later, and I remembered in the meantime one fun technique I forgot to show you that is actually great for creating backgrounds. It's the so-called ink smooshing, and all you need for that is either some acetate, or I just use some old sleeves. I put some paper inside to make it a bit sturdy and flatten it out a bit. And all you need to do is your water reactive dyes. I'm using these again. So the Distress Oxide, obviously any colour is fine. You just smooch it on there. Did I say smooshing? It's smooching. Just the same with the Lavinia stamps. I'm not fussed if I get a bit of residue on there. That'll come off. And then you need your water spray. Obviously you can do that with the brushes as well. I'm getting a bit low on the water here. The brushes work. I'm not so sure about the acrylic spray. I haven't tested that yet. So you water this down, and then all you need to do is you use your cardstock and you just press it down. And you see, depending on how much water you use, it runs. And you can dry it if you want to keep a certain pattern. You can dry it in between and then go on it again. So dry it with your heat tool and then just smoosh it down again. But and it's actually quite nice if you use different colours that then come out. But you can basically go back, press down where you haven't got anything down yet, and you get this sort of watercolour effect. Okay, as I said, depending on how much water you use, affects us differently, and you can go back like with a tissue, mop bits up. I actually like it when you've got bits of white there. So I'm just going to leave this, and I'm going to use the rest, mop it up with another piece of cardstock. I'll quickly show you that actually, what it looks like if you got less ink on it and less water. See, you've got a completely different effect. I just wanted to stay in this colour range with the greens, just to show you the effects of the different backgrounds. So there we go. This is a bit more speckled, but again, very nice. So that's ink smooching for you. And yeah, as I'll leave these to dry as well. I'm not sure I can create the cards today, or I might come back to them tomorrow. Okay, it's about 24 hours later. I did not manage to do any more crafting yesterday. So you've seen this panel that I ink blended over with the yellow. And I have decided to use just these two dyes because I had stains here from the jelly plate, and I had this bit here where I messed up with the acrylic paint spray. So I just decided to cut this bit out and this bit and use them as panels on my cards, because I think they'll be quite nice, and especially as I'm planning Easter cards, the yellow will work really nicely. These two I haven't processed yet because I want to show you the difference between that's the acrylic spray and that's the gel print. So as you can see, the effect with the acrylic spray is much crisper than this one, especially because it had leaked a bit here underneath the stencil. It's still a nice effect. I might do something different with this as well, maybe even go over it with another colour for the background. I haven't quite decided yet, because it is quite harsh, the white actually, but I really love this one with the, don't know if you can see, there's not much daylight yet in the morning, but I really love the green of the spray. These are the ink smooshing ones. These are the ink smooshing ones. That was the wet version, and it is actually quite creased, but I'm not too fussed about it just yet because I can always put it through my die cutting machine to flatten it out a bit. So, and this is the second print with the leftovers, which will work really nicely as another layer on this one. So I'll have a think about this. This is actually the pure spray, just applied, and again I like it. Obviously you can do a two-tone one. I've got another spray as well, but I just wanted to keep it green because as I said, it will probably be all Easter cards. And this is the dried Brusho powders, which I think is absolutely amazing. The only tricky with the Brusho powders is it's very busy already, so when you craft on it you have to be careful not to have a card that is too busy. So I'll probably have to rather do a die cut or do some fussy cutting around a stamp to utilize this. And all these cards are quite big actually. They're all sort of 6 by 8, so I might actually cut them in half and use them for 6 by 4 cards or 4 by 6 cards. So I'll have a think about this and yeah, start crafting in a few hours. Okay, I'm going to pop in and out of my crafting process to show you what I am doing and to keep you up with my thought process. What I have done first of all is I found some card bases from coloured cardstock. At first I thought I'd put it all on white, but as I said to you before, I think the white can actually be a bit stark, especially when I want to use it for Easter. So I found this coloured cardstock. Unfortunately I've only got one A4 panel, but I've cut this to size as a side folding landscape card. I quite like this shape sometimes, especially as a top folding card, but I wanted to use it for the sideward panels. And as a little tip for you, if you have got a certain size that you frequently use, I have marked how to score the line on this one for an A4 sheet, if as a top folding card and as a side folding card. You can also, if you don't want to draw on your scoring board, you can also put a little marker there, but this allows me, when I align my A4 panel, this allows me to see immediately where I need to score it, and that makes it so much easier for me to handle these. And the other thing I just wanted to show you is I have cut this panel, I've cut this into half and actually reduced the size massively because I wanted to get rid of all the edges. And I've also cut these two pieces. My original idea was to somehow put these onto the background here, but it is actually quite busy as such, I think. So what I think I'll do, I use these separately on separate cards, potentially actually on a yellow background, because I think this would be really nice, and then just keep these plain as they are. And for some of these, I've got a special idea how to use these, just like patterned cardstock, but you'll see what I'll do with these. So I'll finish these cards off, I will embellish them, and then I'll talk you through of how I created these cards, and then I go on to the other card. I have now stamped all my hairs on my cards, on my cutouts and my card panels. I just wanted to give you a little tip before I start heat embossing these. First of all, I'm using this Paper Mania Dough Crafts embossing powder in black sparkle. I thought this would be really nice on the background. You could just go black, but I do love my sparkle. So it's got these coloured bits in it. I don't know if you can see this well. My idea was, first of all, my tip is start with the bigger image. You can see this hair is much bigger than this one, because if you want to move one up a little bit, then you need to make sure you've got enough space for the other one. This is what happened here. I thought I put an embellishment at the bottom, so I raised this hair, but then I thought, no, I can't put him on the same level because it won't fit at the top. I didn't want to squeeze him in too much. So start with a bigger image. I actually stamped these separately. I stamped this one first, put the embossing powder on it, and then I knew where he was, and then I did the other one, because otherwise it's difficult to see on this background. And then my other tip, this is why I've got my brush here ready. Yeah, when you have got bits of embossing powder around it, and it might not be that visible to start with, but once you heat emboss it, they will turn up. Just brush them away lightly, and see, I've just put hairs of my brush through this, which is really, really annoying, so I have to remedy that. This is because this is a new brush and I actually need to clean this up while these things happen. So I'm going to do that in a second. And when you heat emboss these, another little tip, always heat emboss from the bottom first, because that way your heat gun won't blow the embossing powder away, and it basically gets adhered first before you hit it from the top. So I shall sort my brush problem here. I don't know if you can see that I've got two hairs sticking out either side that just messed it up. I'm going to put some more embossing powder on that bit, and I'm going to heat emboss these panels. I just realised I only have got one Happy Easter stamp, which is from this set, and I think that's still available on Amazon, so I shall link to that below. But I think it looks a bit boring if I just use that, so my idea was to use another Happy stamp with it. I've got a random one here that comes from one set. I like to cut mine apart and keep sentiments together. So little tip for you is you can actually cut stamps apart, and the easiest thing to do that is to bend them until these bits where the words are not linked, to cut them apart with very fine scissors. So where they're not linked, it's easy, but when you come to here where the P meets the T, just bend them, and you're sure not to cut the bit that is actually stamping. You only cut the background bit that holds it in place. There you go. So I've got my Happy and my Easter separate. If I ever want to use them again, it's easy to just put them together on my acrylic block or my stamping platform, but I can now use this Easter separate. Having said that though, when I stamp this, I make sure I stamp the Easter separate to my Happy, because what can happen, they can have different thicknesses if they're from different companies, so you can always give it a try first, but if they're not the same thickness, they won't stamp properly. So stamp them separately then, and then you're sure you get a proper print. I stamped my Happy Easter and decided I didn't like this. I didn't like this whirly writing with this one. It's not a good mix, I thought. So here's a little tip for you. I went through my stash again, had a look at Happies that are not too whirly, that are rather straight. And I already had my Easter on my block, so I just held it against the Happies. You can't see that as well as I do, or you can always put a bit of white paper underneath and see how well it goes with the stamps. And I actually found this little Happy here, and I think that would be perfect. It's nearly the same size, and I think I've already cut this apart from the day, so that will be even easier to use. So there's another little tip for you. Okay, I have stamped my Happy Easter on all sorts of scraps of cardstock that I thought would go well with the colour scheme I have here. I left enough space around the stamps to allow for me to cut them either in a round shape or in an oval shape, because I don't always like the square bits. This one was already rectangular because that was just a scrap. So that's a little tip for you. And then just stamp them as often as you think you need them, and plus one or two just in case you don't like the die cutting. And don't do what I did here. I had the other stamp set here underneath my scrap paper, didn't realise, and obviously then it didn't stamp well. Doesn't matter, just turned it around, stamped it on there, and because it's quite thick cardstock, you won't be able to see it once it is stuck down that it's actually got something on the back. So that's another little tip for you. So I shall continue with these and then definitely show you the finished cards. The cards are nearly finished, but I wanted to pop in with another little tip. If you add ribbon or something bulky to your card and you want to put the embellishment on the top and you need to put some foam tape or foam rectangles on them, put your embellishment upside down, and then you can see where you need to put your rectangles. So I can see where I need to avoid them, and I can see I need to put some more here, and that really helps with measuring where to put the foam tape and where not. Okay, my first 4 cards are finally finished. So this is the first one. I have put some twine on this. I just adhered it in the back with some red tape, just a little piece on either end, and then just whirled it round because there is some bulk to the twine. I just propped the whole thing up with, I don't know if you can see that, square rectangles, and just pop this on some square rectangles as well. Just 2 strips I cut on either side. So that's the first one. Then this one, I wanted to cover the mess a bit here that I had with the leaking stencil, so I just die cut a bit of a flourish, a foliage from some cardstock. This is actually some scrap cardstock, which is that bit, but it's just the reverse, so you could always use some scraps for these. And I just added the sentiment bit there on some foam as well. So I think that worked out quite nicely. I thought about using some ribbon on this one as well, but because the hairs were so low, I decided against that, and I wanted to keep it as simple as this because it is quite a busy background. But I love the shine, by the way, of the hairs with the glitter embossing powder. Then with this one, I wanted to introduce another bit, which is the lace here. It is not quite the right colour, so I decided rather than introducing another green, I put this on a white background and use a white background for the sentiment, just to tie this in again. And this way it's not too obvious that the green doesn't quite match the green on the stencil here. I did not put the back panel with the lace on some foam because it didn't actually create too much bulk, but I did put this panel on foam as you saw before. So again, I think this is quite nice, and the background now is actually quite subtle, but it's still quite effective. And this is the last one. I showed you this little panel that I cut out from the scraps, and these are actually 2 foliage bits I had cut before for the other card, but I didn't use them. And then when I needed something to fill this space, I realized I could actually use them, and I just used the reverse because I had actually cut them out to use the white side of the cardstock. And nobody will really know. You can actually see, proper crafter, paper crafter can see that these are actually upside down, and you could remedy this by putting them in through the die cutting machine again, but I'm not too fussed about this. And I used a little white lacy ribbon there in the back. Again, I didn't pop up this panel here, but I did the little oval and this one here. And this one here, because I didn't want to introduce another green colour, I actually used my mowed lawn to dye this piece here. I just did some ink blending on it, but because I had a bit of other green on it, it did mix a bit, but it's not too obvious. So that's another tip for you. If you don't have any matching cardstock, just create your own. This one I thought would have been too bright, and so I went for my own colour there. And I think, again, this looks quite nice. I like the oval with the other oval shape here in the other direction, and I think this is really pretty as well. If you think so too, if you like these cards, you might want to give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see what I do with my other bits that I have prepared, then you might want to subscribe to my channel to see what I do with them in a few days' time. Take care.